There's a place on the map that the United States government pretended didn't exist for over 60 years. No address, no official name, no acknowledgement whatsoever. Just a stretch of Nevada desert so classified, so locked down, that the airspace above it is permanently restricted. Pilots flying nearby have been ordered to reroute without explanation. Civilians who wander too close are met by unmarked vehicles and armed guards who never identify themselves. And the people who work there, they're not allowed to tell their families where they go every morning. This is Area 51, and what's happening inside may be stranger than anything you've ever imagined. Let's go back to 1947. The Cold War is heating up. The Soviet Union just tested its first nuclear weapon. America is terrified, not just of bombs, but of being watched, of being seen. The US military needed something the Soviets didn't have: the ability to fly higher, faster, and completely undetected over enemy territory. So the CIA did something extraordinary. They partnered with a private defense contractor, Lockheed's secret division, later known as the Skunk Works, and they went looking for a place to build something that had never been built before. They needed somewhere remote, somewhere so far from civilization that no one would stumble onto it by accident, somewhere with a dry lake bed long enough to land experimental aircraft. They found it in the Nevada desert, near a salt flat called Groom Lake. It was so barren, so desolate, that there was literally nothing there. No towns for miles, no roads, no witnesses. That was the point. By 1955, construction had begun, and what they built out there would change aviation history. The project was called Aquatone, and its flagship aircraft was the U-2 spy plane, a sleek, almost alien-looking aircraft with wings so long they drooped at the tips when it sat on the ground. It could fly at 70,000 feet, higher than any Soviet radar could track, higher than any missile could reach. And it worked. For years, U-2 missions flew directly over Soviet military installations, photographing missile sites, airfields, and weapons factories without a single intercept. But here's where it gets strange. Civilians living in Nevada and California started reporting something in the sky, something that moved too fast, something that didn't behave like any aircraft they'd ever seen. It would streak across the horizon at impossible speeds. It would catch sunlight in ways that seemed metallic, almost otherworldly. Some witnesses said it changed direction without slowing down. The government had a problem. They couldn't tell people what they were seeing. The U-2 program was classified at the highest level, so instead they said nothing, or worse, they let people draw their own conclusions. And the conclusions people drew? Flying saucers. The UFO wave of the 1950s and 60s is almost impossible to separate from Area 51, and that, many now believe, was not entirely an accident. Declassified CIA documents, released years later, openly admit that a significant percentage of UFO reports from that era were actually sightings of classified aircraft, U-2s, and later, something even more extraordinary, the A-12 Oxcart. If the U-2 was a ghost, the A-12 was something else entirely. It flew at Mach 3.2, 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 80,000 feet. It was built from titanium, a material so rare and so difficult to work with that the CIA had to secretly purchase it from the Soviet Union, the very country they were spying on, just to build enough of it. At those speeds, the friction from the air heated the airframe to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The windows had to be made of a special quartz-like material that wouldn't shatter from the heat. The fuel in the tanks would literally expand and leak on the ground. The aircraft was designed to seal itself only once it hit operational speed. Test pilots who flew it described the experience as surreal, like piloting a machine that existed slightly outside of normal physics. One pilot said that at Mach 3 the horizon curved. You could actually see the curvature of the Earth, and when this thing streaked across the Nevada sky, nobody on the ground had a reference point for what they were looking at, because nothing like it had ever flown before, anywhere in history. But the aircraft, as remarkable as they were, only explained part of the mystery, because what came next wasn't about speed or altitude, it was about something the government still hasn't fully explained. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar appeared on a local Las Vegas news broadcast. He was soft-spoken, measured. He didn't seem like he was trying to be famous, and what he said didn't sound like the ranting of a conspiracy theorist. It sounded like an engineer describing his job. He claimed to have worked at a site adjacent to Area 51, a location he called S4. And he claimed that at S4, he had been brought in to back-engineer the propulsion system of a craft that was not built by human hands. He described 9 discs stored in a hangar built into the side of a mountain. He described an element, he called it Element 115, that powered the craft using a gravity wave that current physics couldn't fully explain. He described a reactor so small it fit in your hand. producing energy through a process that shouldn't have been possible given what we knew about science at the time. And then he said something that stopped people cold. He said the government had bodies, not aircraft, not technology, bodies. Now here's the thing about Bob Lazar. His story has been attacked, scrutinized, and picked apart for over 3 decades. Critics say his academic credentials can't be verified. They say key records from his past seem to have been scrubbed, which he claims is itself evidence of a cover-up. Supporters point out that element 115, which didn't exist on the periodic table when Lazar described it, was officially synthesized by scientists in 2003. They named it Moscovian. He described its properties before it was discovered. Is that proof? No. Is it unsettling? Absolutely. Because the deeper you go into Area 51, the more you realize that the line between what's classified and what's impossible is thinner than anyone wants to admit. In 2013, 60+ years after the base opened, the CIA officially acknowledged that Area 51 exists. They declassified documents confirming the U-2 and A-12 programs. They admitted that employees had been transported there on unmarked aircraft, that the location had been kept secret from Congress, and that the restricted airspace was real and permanent. It was framed as a routine declassification. Old history, nothing to see here. But read those documents closely, and you notice something. They answer the questions about old aircraft. They say nothing about what's happening there now, because Area 51 didn't stop growing. Satellite imagery shows constant construction at the base. New runways, new hangars, new facilities that didn't exist 5 years ago. The perimeter has expanded. The restricted airspace has expanded. Whatever they're building out there, it's bigger than it's ever been. The base that was supposedly just for Cold War spy planes has gotten significantly larger in the era of drones and stealth fighters, and they're not expanding it to run old tests. They're expanding it for something new. Consider what we know about classified aviation history and notice the pattern. Every generation, the United States government has operated aircraft that were decades ahead of publicly known technology. The U-2 flew in the 1950s. The SR-71 Blackbird, its successor, wasn't retired until 1998. And when it was, officials said it was because newer, better technology had made it obsolete. Technology they never showed anyone. In 2018, the Pentagon officially acknowledged the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a secretive government initiative studying unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. The videos they released showed objects moving in ways that defied known physics, no visible propulsion, no heat signature, velocity changes that would kill any human pilot. The government's official position? They don't know what these objects are. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military intelligence apparatus in human history, with satellites, radar arrays, and signal intelligence that can track a cell phone from orbit, says it doesn't know what's flying in American airspace. One of two things is true. Either something truly unknown is operating in our skies, or the government knows exactly what it is and is choosing not to say. Both options should terrify you. Here's what the people who've worked near the base say. Not the conspiracy theorists, but the engineers, the contractors, the support staff who've gone on record under their real names. They say you don't ask questions about anything. You get on the Janet flight. That's the unofficial name for the unmarked planes that shuttle workers from Las Vegas to the base. You do your work, you get back on the plane, and you go home. You sign documents that make it illegal for you to describe what you've seen, not just career-ending, legally criminal. One retired contractor described it simply, "There are things I've seen that I will take to my grave, not because I want to, because I have to." What kind of thing requires that level of secrecy? Not an old spy plane. The town of Rachel, Nevada sits about 25 miles from the Area 51 perimeter. Population, roughly 50 people. A diner, a motel, a stretch of road that locals call the extraterrestrial highway. People come from all over the world to stand on that road and stare at the mountains in the distance, the ones hiding the base. On clear nights, lights move across the sky above the restricted zone. Sometimes they hover, sometimes they accelerate in ways that seem impossible, sometimes they simply vanish. The guards at the perimeter, the ones in the unmarked camouflage trucks, watch the watchers. They record license plates, they photograph faces. Standing on a public road and looking in the direction of a military base is enough to get your name in a file somewhere. That alone should tell you something. Normal government facilities don't watch the people watching them. In 2019, a joke Facebook event called Storm Area 51 went viral. 2 million people said they'd show up. It became a meme, a festival, a cultural moment. People laughed. The Air Force issued a warning. The government seemed almost amused, but here's what nobody talked about beneath all the jokes. The impulse behind it was real. Millions of people, in a moment of collective frustration, said, "We want to know what's in there. We want the truth." And the response from the government was not transparency. It was a warning. Stay away. That's the bargain we've all accepted. The world's most powerful democracy, built on the idea that government answers to its people. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, there's a place that answers to no one. No oversight, no public accountability, no explanation, just a dry lake bed, a chain link fence with warning signs, and 60 years of questions that nobody with real answers will touch. So what is Area 51? A test site for classified aircraft? Yes. Certainly that. The history is real. The U-2 is real. The A-12 is real. The extreme secrecy around legitimate defense programs is real and in some ways understandable. But that doesn't explain all of it. It doesn't explain the expansion. It doesn't explain the UAP footage the Pentagon itself released and then refused to clarify. It doesn't explain why Bob Lazar described an element that didn't exist, and then it did. It doesn't explain the workers who say they've seen things they can never speak about, not because they don't want to, but because the consequences are federal. The truth about Area 51 probably exists somewhere between classified aircraft program and something we're not ready to know. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not that they're hiding something, but that after 60 years of asking, we're still not sure we actually want the answer.